Is we're relying upon Congress to do what they have steadfastly refused to do for 225 years. And why is that going to change? So certainly you can be opposed to the resolution. I would urge you to, even if you're opposed, vote this down and vote against the resolution. But don't adopt this with any sort of assumption that it will have any impact or change anything. Urge your no vote on the amendment.
Anyone else for the first time? Oh, Representative Winters, please.
Hello there, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much, and I agree with the words of the previous speaker. I asked for your no vote on this particular amendment, and just to point something out, there have been over 400 such resolutions over the last couple hundred years asking for Congress to do several things. And just to remind you, there are two ways of utilizing Article 5. One is through the method that's been used 31 times, 27 of which have been ratified by the various states. The other one is the one that we're speaking of here in this bill today. And Article 5's convention is the tool that is given to states to check federal power. It is not controlled by Congress. And when you look at the history of what has been designed, let me just go through it just a little bit. And I'm going to speak a little bit extra on this particular topic because I want to lay a few fears to rest. Mr. Speaker, is it appropriate to speak of our founding fathers by their names, or do I need to find some other mechanism to speak toward that?
You need to find another mechanism.
Yes, sir. The man known as the father of our Constitution, from that state where our first president was from. Our third president. Thank you very much. He spoke toward this particular amendment quite a lot. In an early version of Article 5, it gave Congress the power to propose amendments whenever two-thirds of both houses deemed it necessary. It also gave Congress the power when two-thirds of the state legislatures applied. And at first that sounds very similar, but there was a key difference, and there was a reason why one of the delegates from the state with the very large city in it objected to that, because it was Congress who would be doing the proposing. And he thought the plan, this was taken right from the diary of that third president, he thought that the plan of amending the Constitution exceptional and dangerous, as the proposing of amendments is in both modes to depend in the first immediately and in the second ultimately on Congress. No amendments of the proper kind would ever be obtained by the people if the government should become oppressive, as he very believed would be the case. And it's because of his speaking that we came to the current version of Article 5. And Article 5 was very carefully designed in this way, and it was addressed also by the first Secretary of the Treasury of our country, who's currently on the $10 bill. But he made this statement in Federalist 85. He said, "But every amendment to the Constitution, if once established, would be a single proposition and might be brought forward singly." And he's pointing out the fact that amendments to the Constitution are single subject amendments. Secondly, he says later on in the same Federalist paper, he said, "But the fifth article of the plan, the Congress would be obliged on application of the legislatures of two-thirds of the states, which at present amount to 9, to call a convention for proposing amendments which shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of the Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof." And he says this, "The words of this article are peremptory. The Congress shall call a convention. Nothing in this particular is left to the discretion of that body." He says later, "We may safely rely on the disposition of the state legislatures to erect barriers against the encroachments of national authority." And the reason why I speak to that in regards to this particular amendment is because it is an attempt to cut out this particular avenue for the states to, as was mentioned by the previous speaker, to change the calculus of power in our country. And I believe that this is an avenue that must be explored for the good of the country. And so it is for that reason, Mr. Speaker, I speak against this particular amendment.
Representative Kirkbride for your first time. First time for second time? Anyone else for their first time? Anyone for their second time prior to the sponsor? Representative Kroeker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I agree. I'm not trying to imply that calling an Article 5 Constitution is unconstitutional. I know it's a tool that's there, but the fact of the matter is one has never been called, so we don't know what the results would be. We don't know if there is an element of it that could get out of control or we don't like. So, like I said, I wanted to present this as an alternative. Vote your conscience. I'll call for the question.
We're voting on third reading amendment number 2 to House Joint Resolution 3. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Third reading amendment number 2 has failed. We're now on third reading amendment number 1 to House Joint Resolution 3. Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I bring you Third Amendment reading number 1 for House Joint Resolution 3, and at the appropriate time I will set aside the amendment. The Articles of Confederation was our first Constitution. The delegates were instructed to only amend the Articles of Confederation. All 13 states were to agree if there was going to be any changes in the Articles of Confederation. The convention changed the number to 9, and they went into a closed session. In changing the number of states that had to agree to 9, they were changing what their charge was to go to have a constitutional convention. When they made the change to that, the delegates went into a closed session. They came out with the Constitution that we have today, the second Constitution. They threw away the Articles of Confederation, which they were not supposed to do. And in doing so, when they did that, they had forsaken their oaths. There were some of those that held by their oath and went back to their home state and did not stay there to vote on it. Now, the people that were at this convention of states that they had were our founding fathers of the Constitution that we know today. Those that were at that were some of the most brilliant minds I think history has ever known. They gave us a document that I hold to me that would be only second to the Bible that God has given us. They were a wise set of folks that came out of a repressive government that had a king over it that was a very repressive king. And they gave us the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that we have today. There is no other government that has ever had the opportunities that Wyoming has, or the United States has in the history of the world. The opportunities that have been afforded us because of the freedoms that are guaranteed us are more than any state or any nation in the world has ever been given. We have men that have stood up and given us the greatest document in the world, like I said, outside of the Bible. There is many countries that would have liked to have emulated it, starting with Russia for a few months before Russia took over, the communists took over in Russia, they tried to emulate it. The Philippines tried to emulate it with theirs, but none of them were successful. The people of the world love the United States. They believe that we are their protectors. They come to this country in droves. The people that come as immigrants to this country are not held into their countries, or I should say they're held into their country, sometimes with barbed wires and fences. In this country, you're free to come and go as you choose. You don't have to ask permission to leave. With the Constitution being amended, we open up the cause for the Constitution that we have and hold so dear to be eliminated. Some would call this fear-mongering. I would not call it fear-mongering. We have a Constitution that is the greatest document in the world. There is nothing that's wrong with the Constitution that we have. The problem is those that are in Congress will not adhere to what we have as a Constitution. They choose to go around it by not obeying the Constitution that we have. I hope that you will vote against H.J. 103. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the amendment and in favor of the bill. And I agree with much of what the last speaker said, and I share his appreciation for and devotion to our Constitution. But one thing I don't share is the focus on the past. And the whole discussion was about the past. I think what's more important is the future. Because what is at stake is the future. Not only our future, but our children's future and frankly our grandchildren's future. Because what we have is a national debt that will serve as handcuffs for generations to come. That will serve as an anchor on the economy for anchors to come, for decades to come, unless we do something about it. And so the question then becomes, how is doing nothing, is voting against this resolution, calculated to do anything about that, what is really a national tragedy? And it doesn't. And there's been lots of discussions. I know you've all received phone calls, as have I, and emails about the uncertainties. And the uncertainty about what does this ultimate proposed amendment look like? There's questions about how do you control the budget? What impact does that have on the states? And there's a lot of uncertainty. And that's why it's the process of going through, of debating an amendment, of getting an amendment that 3/4 of the states can agree to, and then having it ratified. But I think even more important than that uncertainty is, what is the certainty? And the certainty is, if we do nothing, if we do not pass this resolution, if we do not join the other 28 states that have done so and invite the other 6 that we need to get a constitutional convention, we know what the result will be. It will be the same irresponsible spending that we see decade after decade. It will be the same non-responsiveness that we see from Congress when we make repeated calls for a balanced budget and are ignored. So the certainty is, if we sit here and we vote no, nothing will happen. So I would challenge you to step beyond fears, step beyond uncertainty, take a leap of courage and avail ourselves of the solution that our founding fathers gave us in that document. The Constitution is an amazing document, but it's not perfect. We've changed it. We've changed it over and over again. And the founding fathers knew that there would be changes that made sense, and they gave us the authority to do it, and they gave us as states the authority to set parameters around the federal government. And I think it's time, and long time, that since we should have done that. So I would just ask for you to vote no on the amendment, support the bill, and let's take this courageous step forward.
Representative Winters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I also want to express my approval and commendation of those who have expressed their fears. on this because I believe that what they're expressing comes from an obvious love of the Constitution, and I share that same love. And so I want you to know that right off the bat. I appreciate what I'm hearing, but I want to just speak to a couple other things too. I understood the statement that was given by the bringer of the amendment, that the Constitution is not the problem. And I would agree, the Constitution is not the problem. It is the various interpretations of the Constitution that have arisen over time. In 1824, when the Commerce Clause was dramatically rewritten in the highest federal court in the land case, it's fundamentally changed the future of the country. In 1937, when there was another case that fundamentally rewrote the General Welfare Clause of the Constitution by that same court, it fundamentally changed the Constitution of the United States.
Really? How so?
And so what has happened is that there have been court rulings that have changed, I believe, core beliefs that were written years ago. And so this is where amendments can come along to clarify the original meaning of those phrases.
There ain't nothing wrong with the original Constitution,
and that's exactly what we're speaking of right now. That's what this bill gives us the opportunity to do.
No.
And we've discussed the whole idea of a runaway convention and all of those different things, and I heard that also by the speaker. But just to point a few things out, when you look backwards at what occurred there in Philadelphia, you can understand that this was done completely outside the scope of the then Congress operating under the previous document. The then Congress did, after 7 states had already given their approval to work together to work on the Articles of Confederation, those 7 states had already submitted delegates to meet at the place that the city that now holds Independence Hall in 1787. And so they were already meeting for those purposes. And then finally, the federal Congress sent a letter of approval for what was done, and they did speak toward the Articles of Confederation. And so, but to believe that Congress at that time had given them a limited scope and that they exceeded the scope of what they were called to do is not actually factual from the perspective of history. And that's one of the things I also want to point out, that we have to be very conscious of that. I've also heard a number of individuals speak toward the subject of nullification. And I'll tell you this, I am no lawyer, and there have been many people who have spoken for, at this point, over 200 years on this particular subject. And we have to understand that there are different sides of this whole nullification issue. For instance, one of the methods is refusing to accept any federal funds and preserve freedom from invasive federal regulations that are tied to those funds. And I don't disagree with that. But there are also countless other abuses of federal power that have crept in through the years, like national debt, federal agencies spying on U.S. citizens through cell phones and email, or unilateral decisions of an executive branch to take our nation to war, or other different things, or how they control land in western states. All of these things have crept up through the years. And so when people speak of the idea of nullification, basing it out of the 10th Amendment, let me just remind you that the 10th Amendment establishes a principle. It doesn't establish a remedy or process in this particular case. A person actually, by pleading that particular methodology, has to also read the entire 10th Amendment, which says the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So if we were to follow the principle of nullification strictly out of the 10th Amendment and just read the 10th Amendment straightly, the people, individuals, could nullify how they would choose to interpret the Constitution. So you have to understand what the 10th Amendment is telling us is that there is a principle established, but not necessarily a remedy or process. And the question would be why? Why is it not established in the 10th? Because it's established in Article 5. This is the method that states use to push back against federal encroachment. And so I want to point these different issues out, and I would most certainly ask for you to vote against this particular amendment to this bill and for the bill as an entirety.
Representative Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think one of the most interesting aspects of the petition is something that we're forgetting about, and that this petition process has been used throughout our history to force Congress into action. Specifically, the 17th Amendment, the 21st Amendment, the 22nd Amendment, the 25th Amendment. All of those amendments are tied directly to the petition process, and states almost closing the door on reaching that magic number of 34. Congress doesn't want to give up their power. Congress doesn't want to tip over and say, holy cow, somebody else can make decisions. They don't want to do that. And so that's why, in those instances, they have tipped over and done what the people were asking. So if Congress isn't doing what the people have asked them to do, it's our job as a state legislature to demand that they do those things and to demand that they actually take action. And it has worked before in our history. Sure, we've never gone to a convention of states, which, by the way, is actual what Article 5 is, a convention of the states. It's not a constitutional convention. It's not a con-con. That's not anywhere in our Constitution. It's a convention of states. So it has been used before. It's been used effectively, and I ask you to vote against this amendment and in favor of the bill for the simple purpose that it is proven to work. Thank you.
Representative Halverson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bringer of this resolution, who spoke just a moment ago, hit on the nut of the problem, and that is the spending that is going on in our federal government. However, in this proposed resolution, spending is not addressed. The only thing that's required is balance. There's nothing that would restrain spending, therefore restraining the revenues needed to meet the spending. And that would require the balance. There are much better ideas out there than this balanced budget amendment resolution. For example, allowing the government to borrow when the business cycle is down during a recession, but then mandating that the debt be repaid when the business cycle springs back up again. So yes, there is a spending problem. This resolution does nothing to cure the spending problem that we have in this country. It only requires balance. And if our central federal government is going to continue spending, it follows, like day follows night, that revenues are going to need to be increased drastically to the tune of 50 cents of every dollar that's being spent in Washington, in our capital. Aye on the amendment and no on the resolution.
Anyone else for the first time? Representative Jennings.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the former speaker. I think that's something to really be thought of. For me, the real question, and probably most of you know I've supported this in the past. Last year we passed something very similar. But for me, the word is integrity. And as I look at this question, when we passed this similar thing last year, it went to a different body, and they chose to disregard how it was brought about from this body. And so I see that as a lack of integrity to the actual intent. And so as I look at that and I think about things like the former speaker talking about raising spending to, or raising income to match whatever we want to spend, it becomes for me a question of integrity. And we could address these issues if we had some integrity. And so I just see this as it would add a tool, but there's tools there right now. It's the lack of integrity that seems to be the problem. So I'm in favor of the amendment against the bill.
Anyone else for the first time? Representative Jaggi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Appreciate this conversation. We kind of had this good conversation on this last night, and the bringer of this resolution is pretty certain that there's no chance of something happening that we don't want to. I wish I felt that same concern. Let me read you a couple things. While the Constitution is silent on the mechanics of Article 5 Convention, Congress has traditionally laid claim to the broad responsibilities in connection with a convention, including, number one, receiving, judging, and recording state applications, establishing procedures to summon a convention, setting the amount of time allotted to its deliberations, determining the number and selection process for its delegates, and setting internal convention procedures, including all allocations and votes of the states, and arranging the formal transmission of any proposed amendments to the state. So I think Congress does have a little bit to say with this, and as we send our delegates, we will decide the delegates that go there, and supposedly it's just a one-theme purpose that we're going there, and the theme, of course, is we're spending too much money. But as just pointed out, the Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse, and Article 1, Section 8 lists the responsibilities the states ceded to the Congress, and Congress is supposed to spend only money for those things that are mentioned. All other areas are reserved to the states and to the people through the 10th Amendment that has been mentioned. Yet the federal government has formed layers of bureaucracy it has no authority over and spends money on items outside its jurisdiction. So I think the idea of bringing this to stop the federal government from spending is a good idea, but I think there's some things that need to be considered. I would say, is this the right political climate to be opening up a constitutional convention?
No.
I'm a little scared of what's going on, and I'm not sure convening this right now is something in that climate. Let's get it settled a little bit, see where we are before we get into this. So, because I'm a little concerned, I appreciate we need to do something, but I'm not sure doing something without some good, well thought through procedures is something we need to do. So I would encourage us to deny this. Thank you.
Representative Blackburn.
Mr. Speaker, friends of the House, I think we all fear this to some extent, but I think we, through the years, have said, well, we'll do something. We send people to Congress, and they said they'll do something, and nothing ever gets done. So when do we make a stand? Do we make a stand now, or do my grandkids and great-grandkids make that stand? I'd rather do it myself.
Better off.
Thank you.
Come on, Reader. Kroeker.
Anyone else for their first time? Anyone for their second time before the sponsor? Representative Winters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate all of the comments that I've heard this far and respect those individuals as they have brought them. And let me just tackle a couple things here. And I heard someone mention something about a single subject question, and I ran into a really fancy word, and I think that those whose profession is that of in the law would be able to speak at length on this particular subject, but it's a Latin term called ultra vires, and it speaks toward people speaking beyond the subject, beyond the question that has been brought. And in that particular case, they've made it very clear in an Article 5 Convention for Proposing Amendments that amendment, once it's been brought by 34 different states, if someone attempts to bring something that is outside the scope or beyond the scope of that particular amendment, that it is actually at that point considered invalid. And so you have to understand about this subject of the single subject question. I've already read to you from the statement in Federalist 85 where that is exactly what one of the founders spoke of in trying to disseminate information about what had happened at the Constitutional Convention. In the Federalist Papers, he made it clear that these were single subjects, and then later on in the next sentence he uses the word singly. And so let me just say that right there, that single subject question, I believe, is historically, and I think also through jurisprudence, would be considered maybe a fear too far. Secondly, the question of the role of Congress. Let me just give you a couple reports that I've been able to take a look at. In this particular case, that federal legislative body actually had their version of LSO take a look at this, and they did submit some things, and of course they were looking at it strictly from a congressional perspective. And they brought out a few things. Congress is obligated to call a convention for proposing amendments if 34 states apply. It's one of the things they said, frankly. The founders included in this process as a way for states to bypass Congress in getting needed amendments passed. The process is an alternative to federal deadlock on an issue. Congress has no authority to veto amendments proposed at an Article 5 convention, and thirdly, the federal executive plays no role in that process. That is by their own studies. Congress has no control over the convention for proposing amendments. And so when you take a look at that, I appreciate the fears that have been stated, but you look at their role. They have the opportunity to set the time and place of the convention. Lastly, they have the ability, once that convention for proposing amendments has concluded, they have the opportunity for saying whether they will be submitted to the respective state legislatures or whether they will be submitted to conventions within the various states. That second alternative has only been used once, and that was on the repeal of prohibition. But both of those have been used already in time past. So you have to understand the limited scope, the limited powers of Congress. And again, going back toward that original Articles of Confederation and Constitutional Convention, you can see that they understood those limitations to their power in that particular case as well. And so I appreciate what has been stated, but I also believe that history and just reading clearly through Article 5 will answer those particular fears. And so again, against this particular amendment and for the bill.
Anyone else for the second time before the sponsor? Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To answer some of the questions, it does take 34 states to make a call for a constitutional convention. Congress shall make that call once the 34 states have come forward asking for a convention. The delegates that are at the convention set the rules for what is going to take place at the convention, just as they did in the first constitutional convention that we had on the Articles of Confederation. They had their limits that they were supposed to abide by, and that was just to amend the Articles of Confederation. They went over and above what their charge was. They changed the rules of the amending process to where it was supposed to be all 13 states that had to agree. They lowered it to 9. There is, with this, the Article of Confederation being set aside and thrown out, there is precedence for what was going to happen in the next convention that we had. James Madison said that he feared what would happen if we ever had a second one. And I definitely agree with him on that. The states, after they make the call for the convention, they are to set who they have as delegates. The Congress has the opportunity, after that happens, on who they're going to have or how many they're going to have. On some of them, they say there's only going to be one per state, but Congress can change that according to the Electoral College, where those states have larger number would have a bigger representation than we do. We do not know the outcome that would come out of this. It is an uncertainty. All we know is after that call for a constitutional convention is placed, that there will be a constitutional convention. And there is no going back. There is no being able to change your mind and say, I wished I hadn't. Whenever the call for the Constitutional Convention and the convention starts, they still have the possibility to do as the Articles of Confederation convention happened. They can close their doors and they don't have to tell anybody what happened in that convention.
That's wrong.
It would be secret.
You betcha.
So the state's putting a noose around the neck of their representatives would be taken away at that time. So we have no certainty that we would be able to put any limits on them. As far as the future that we have, one of the speakers before me said that we need to look to the future, and I agree, but you can always look to the past. Those who will not, I can't remember the exact quote, but those that don't pay attention to the past are bound to repeat it, the same mistakes. And I don't want to have happen what happened to the Articles of Confederation, where they throw out the Constitution that we have. There are 5 different groups of people that have constitutions all ready to go. All they need is a mechanism to make it happen.
Yep.
So there is that threat out there. Some think it's not real, but when somebody else has their constitutions already in place, that threat is real.
Yep.
The opportunity to change and to make a difference. That's why we have come to this body, is to make a difference. If each and every one that is pushing for a constitutional convention, if they were as committed to having the Congress balance the budget now, if they were to put their focus strictly on the representatives and senators in Congress, I believe that you would probably already obtain that goal, because they would have such heat on them because they knew that you were serious. Most people just want Congress to leave them alone. They want politicians or government to leave them alone. They like the opportunities that they have, but they don't spend a lot of time communicating with their congressmen. That is the problem that is happening now. Congress has not had the communication from the people of the United States, not to an extent that they would feel that they need to be forced into taking action. And they can balance a budget without us having to do anything. All they have to do is decide to quit spending more than we take in. If Congress would not and did not increase the national debt, we would have a balanced budget tomorrow. They would have hard decisions to make. One of the fellers that was presenting that they have a constitutional convention in the committee, when I brought this up to him, and he said, well, we couldn't do that. That would be too drastic. If it was too drastic to do, and it would take several years for them to come up with a way to balance the budget, where are you really going to go? How long is it going to take? The fears that this body has in being able to keep our country from being ruined by the debt that we have, it still remains. We need to make sure that there is no canceling out of our Constitution that we have, and keep what we have for our children and their posterity, that we may be able to go ahead in the future and be thankful for what our founding fathers did. I will always look back on that past and be thankful for those who gave, in some cases, they gave their lives to give us what we have. I will always defend that. At this time, I will withdraw my amendment, and I am on and against HJ 3. Thank you.
Third reading amendment number 1 to House Joint Resolution 3 has been withdrawn. House Joint Resolution 3 having been read 3 separate times. The question is, shall the bill pass? The Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Allen, Baker, Baldwin, Barlow, Berger, Blackburn, Blake, Burkhart, Byrd, Campbell, Kennedy, Clem, Connolly, Dayton, Edmonds, Edwards, Eklund, Escabel, Freeman, Gay, excused, Greer, Halverson, Harshman, Harvey, Hunt, Jaggi, Jennings, Kasparic, Kinner, Kirkbride, Kroeker, Crone, Larson Lloyd, Larson Dan, Lindholm, Lockhart, Laux, Madden, McKim, Miller, Moniz, Nicholas, Northrup, Paxton, Helke, Petroff, Piperinen, Pennell, Reeder, Schwartz, Summers, Steinmetz, Stubson, Throne, Walters, Wilson, Winters, Swanitzer Dan, Swanitzer Dave. Mr. Speaker, I'm about to close the vote. Are there any changes? Are there any changes? The vote is closed. 28 aye, 31 no, 1 excused.